Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Reacteria. So a couple of weeks ago, a friend of mine sent me a clip from the Joe Rogan Experience, arguably one of the podcasts of all time, in which Joe Rogan was interviewing the living, breathing dog whistle known as Tucker Carlson. And they sent it because somewhere in the middle of that 3-hour-long nightmare of an interview, Joe Rogan makes an offhand comment about evolution, and Tucker Carlson seizes the opportunity to interject his objections about the theory. You've heard him deny climate change, now let's hear him deny primate change. That's awful. I can't put that in there. Now, I did notice that a couple of my friends have already made videos about this interview as well, but I made it a point not to watch their videos before making my own because I felt like that would be cheating. But I encourage you to go check those videos out so you can hear more people who actually know what they're talking about discuss the problems with Tucker's disillusionment with evolution. But before we get into it, I'd like to take a second to thank my patrons on Patreon. They're the reason why I'm able to afford things like food and utility bills while also working 30 hours a day, 10 days a week on all of the insane projects that I've taken on lately. Projects like Roll for Initiative, where my friends and I played over 30 hours of Tales of the Valiant over the course of 5 days in order to raise money for Doctors Without Borders. That series is the biggest and wildest thing that I have ever coordinated, filmed, or edited, and the first episode comes out right here on this channel on June 12th with a new episode every single week after that, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a thing. And with that, let's watch a grown man spout some nonsense, shall we? Now, as I alluded to before, this brief discussion on evolution pops up seemingly out of nowhere, right in the middle of an already unhinged conversation about AI and how to start a career and nukes and who knows what else. I went back over 10 minutes before where I'm about to start this clip to try to find a reasonable starting point to this part of the conversation. And there just isn't one, nor would it make any sense for me to include that much irrelevant content in this video. The point is, I'm not cutting out any necessary context here that would change the meaning of what they're saying. Nor could I imagine there would be any context to this clip that would make it any less painful. So I'm just gonna start this clip right at the moment when Joe mentions the word evolution. Here we go.
But if evolution is real, and if there is this constant... I don't know.
So right away, the conversation starts with Tucker asking if evolution is true, and Joe saying he doesn't know, which at face value isn't anything worth criticizing. If you don't know something, you should say that you don't know that thing. But what's going to follow is a series of weak and vapid and meaningless and easily debunkable arguments about evolution from Tucker, and Joe offering little pushback, if any at all. All of which falls right in line with his notoriously irresponsible hosting style of letting his guests say any crazy, ridiculous, off-the-wall thing they want to say, and if he contests it, following up those contests with, "I'm just an idiot. I'm just a comedian. No one should listen to me about anything. No one should take any advice from me. I'm just asking questions. I'll let anybody on this show. I'm just looking for diverse opinions from a wide variety of people. It doesn't matter that I have the #1 most listened to podcast on Spotify. It doesn't matter that I have tens of millions of subscribers on YouTube. It doesn't matter that I have an average estimated viewership of over 11 million people per episode. I've only been a professional entertainer and television host for several decades. So how am I supposed to know how to regulate my own platform?" Like, remember back in 2022 when he got in a bunch of hot water because he and several of his guests spread a bunch of COVID misinformation? Like, for example, that the most useful COVID treatments were being suppressed by greedy doctors, that masks don't stop the spread of disease, that mRNA vaccines are gene therapy, that off-label ivermectin is an effective treatment for COVID, that getting COVID and recovering from it gives you permanent immunity, that the public was being hypnotized by public health information, that the CDC and the FDA didn't have any safety reviews, that the pandemic was planned by the government, that the vaccines were a threat to reproductive health, that the vaccines had killed tens of thousands of people, that the spike proteins produced after the vaccines damaged the heart and the brain, that children shouldn't be vaccinated, that healthy people shouldn't be vaccinated, that people who exercise and eat well shouldn't be vaccinated, that COVID can't be spread by people who are asymptomatic, that hospitals wouldn't test you for COVID if you'd already been vaccinated, and that the vaccine was giving people HIV. And none of that is even mentioning the fact that he had multiple guests compare COVID safety measures and vaccine efforts to the Holocaust. And then he apologized for all of that by saying that he just asked questions and he doesn't even know what the podcast is going to be until he sits down and does it. And then less than 24 hours after issuing that apology, he tweeted an article about how you can treat COVID with ivermectin. Oh, and also the episodes of him interviewing people like Robert Malone and Peter McCulloch are still up on Spotify. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to stop you there. While I truly appreciate you coming onto this show to share your opinions and your expertise, it's very clear that what you're saying right now goes against what the world's leading medical experts are telling us. And while that doesn't necessarily mean that you're wrong, I'm a comedian and a podcaster with no biology or medical experience to speak of, which means it would be wholly inappropriate for me to try to field your claims right now, especially considering the fact that we're in the middle of a global public health crisis. So if you'd like to talk about something else that you have some expertise in, or even something that you don't have expertise in that's silly and speculative and doesn't have massive ramifications for my millions of listeners, I would be happy to do that instead. See how easy that is? Anyway, this episode isn't about Joe Rogan. I just wanted to set the stage for people who are fortunate enough to not be familiar with his show to understand why this situation of two men who know nothing about evolution debating evolution is particularly funny in this specific context.
But it's visible. Like, you can measure it in certain animals.
You can measure adaptation.
Yeah.
So within seconds, we get the first bad argument, that adaptation isn't the same thing as evolution. This is something we've come across several times in this series, but if this is your first time watching, you should know that splitting hairs between adaptation and evolution in order to try to discredit evolution is a deeply silly thing to do for a lot of reasons. First and foremost, the word adaptation is kind of tricky because it can mean the process of acquiring a new trait through evolution, and it can also be used to refer to the trait itself. So giraffes getting longer and longer and longer necks over successive generations is adaptation, but you could also call the neck itself an adaptation. And the term gets especially tricky because it's used colloquially by a lot of people to mean short-term reversible changes that happen within one individual's lifetime. Like when you get used to the cold water in a pool within a matter of minutes, or used to the hot weather on vacation over a matter of days. And the issue arises when creationists like Tucker Carlson conflate and contort those meanings to try to paint a new picture that evolution only means massive phenotypic changes, changing one species to another species, or one kind to another kind, and that any changes within a population, within a species, or even within a family isn't actually evolution, but is just adaptation, absolutely none of which is true. Remember, the textbook definition of evolution is any change in the heritable characteristics of a population over the course of multiple generations. That means that depending on how you're using the word, adaptation is either a part of evolution or the result of evolution. To try to split the two apart and say that one is true and the other isn't is like saying that pages are real but books aren't, or atoms are real and molecules aren't. It's completely ridiculous, and it only shows that Tucker knows absolutely nothing about the science that he is currently trying to debunk.
But there's no evidence that in fact, I think we've kind of given up on the idea of evolution. The theory of evolution as articulated by Darwin is like kind of not true.
It's at this point that I'd like to remind everybody that every bit of modern agriculture and modern medicine and forensics and psychology and neuroscience and countless consumer goods and services are all based on our understanding of evolution. To try to say that it's something that we've just given up on requires one to not think of any antibiotics they've ever taken, or any produce that they've ever purchased, or any pets that they've ever owned. Or more succinctly, it would just require someone to not think.
In what sense?
Well, in the most basic sense, the idea that, all life emerged from a single cell organism and over time, and there would be a fossil record of that, and there's not.
So here we start getting into this segment where Tucker is going to just flatly deny that the fossil record is in any way compelling. And he's going to do this by not only denying that many fossils exist, but also grossly mischaracterizing what the fossil record is and what it can tell us. Take a listen.
There's not a fossil record of transitionary species, like species that are adapting to its environment.
There's
and they
tons
develop...
of record of adaptation, and you see it in your own life. I mean, I have a lot of dogs. I see adaptation in dogs, through the...
Sure.
But no, there's no evidence at all zero, that, people, evolve seamlessly from a single cell amoeba. No, there's not. There's no chain in the fossil record of that at all.
So the evidence that Tucker is demanding here in order to believe evolution is an unbroken chain of fossils from an amoeba all the way to a human. And as someone who used to be 5 years old, I can understand why he might think that. But the problem is that not only do we have plenty of fossils of every single, what you might call, stage of evolution from a single-celled organism all the way up to modern humans, but this perfect unbroken chain of fossils is completely unreasonable. Fossils are exceedingly rare, very difficult to find, and extremely fragile things, especially when you're talking about fossils of microorganisms or other things that don't have a skeleton. Think about the Cambrian explosion. All of those different organisms didn't just pop up out of nowhere. Skeletons have evolved at least a dozen times over life's history, and about half of those times were during the Cambrian. So we suddenly have way more fossils during the Cambrian because there was finally something that could reliably fossilize. The rest of the time, even if something does fossilize, those fossils often get destroyed by tectonic activity, or by mining, or by construction, or by agriculture, and even if one sticks around long enough to be found, the largest, most amazing organism is still just a tiny little thing living on this very big planet and is now a fossil somewhere deep underground where you don't know where to look for it. The fact that we ever find any fossils at all is a testament to just how much life has existed on this planet over the course of the last 3.8 billion years. And none of that's even mentioning the big secret of paleontology, which is that not all fossils are even particularly useful. This is a fossil that I dug up on a paleo dig in West Oklahoma last year. It's a piece of a shaft of a long bone, it's from a mammal, and it's about 15 million years old. And that's all the information that I can extract from this. This fossil is not diagnostic, it doesn't have any ends to it, I can't tell you what kind of mammal it is or what it was doing. The most information that I can get out of this fossil is that a mammal existed during the Miocene. That's not exactly news. So what Tucker is saying here, that there isn't this perfect unbroken chain of fossils from an amoeba to a human, and that's the same thing as not having any evidence for evolution whatsoever, isn't just wrong, it's just saying something wrong in order to justify something else that's wrong, in order to jump to a conclusion that's just wrong. And that's the exact kind of not thinking that you would expect from somebody who's spent his entire career as a magician whose only trick is turning mundane news stories into white supremacist dog whistles.
And that's why you don't actually hear people, you hear them make reference to evolution because the theory of adaptation is clearly, obviously true. But Darwin's theory's totally, that's why it's still a theory almost 200 years later. No, we have not found that at all.
Now here we have this really telling moment where Tucker can't even keep his own terminology straight with himself. He just said that evolution is still just a theory, meaning that it's never been proven to be true. This, of course, is an incorrect use of the word theory. In common parlance, the word theory means just a guess or a wild idea, but in science, a theory is a functional explanation for observed natural phenomena that is backed by all the best evidence that we have and contradicted by none of it. It is the highest level to which an idea can possibly be elevated. And because I've taught that lesson about 1,000 times and I know what's coming next, no, theories do not become laws when they are proven. Laws and theories are completely different things and they serve different purposes. A great way to think about this is that laws tell you what is happening and theories tell you how. So, for example, Mendel's laws tell you the predictable patterns by which genes are passed on from parent to offspring and which genes are most likely to be expressed, whereas gene theory tells you what genes are, how they work, and how they're passed on in the first place. So if Tucker's going to take issue with evolution because it's just a theory, he better have the same problem with cells and genes and germs and atoms and plate tectonics and gravity, because those are all theories too. But as I mentioned, he can't even keep his own misuse of the word theory consistent, because right before that, he said that the theory of adaptation, which isn't a thing, is obviously true. And then with the next breath, said that evolution isn't true because it's just a theory. So which is it, Tucker? Are theories true or not? I can't get over the fact that this man just used the same word 2 times back to back in the same sentence with completely different meanings and thought we wouldn't notice. Like the dude's confusing himself with the rest of us. We pay attention.
And I can't even guess. I mean, I have my own theories on it, but they're not proven.
What are your theories?
God created people, distinctly, and animals. I mean, I think what every person on Earth thought until the mid-19th century, actually.
Right, but
it's not a new idea.
So this is actually quite impressive, because here we have the bandwagon fallacy, the argument from antiquity fallacy, and the argument from ignorance fallacy all at the same time. Like, that was a masterclass in being wrong. Coincidentally, another thing that nobody believed in until around the mid-20th century? Plate tectonics. It used to be believed that earthquakes were caused by the shifting of vast underground oceans, or that the core of the Earth went through cooling and heating periods, or that the whole Earth itself was expanding like a balloon, until the early 1900s, when geologists started gathering evidence for things like continental drift. And by the 1960s, plate tectonics was a well-established and accepted theory, and it remains so to this day. There was even a big public debate about whether we should be teaching this radical new theory in public schools. And yet I would bet good money that you will never hear Tucker Carlson talking about how plate tectonics is just a theory, because you can't go back and see this perfect unbroken chain of continental configurations going back several millions and billions of years, and how people used to believe that giants and spirits were shaking the earth and causing earthquakes, so that's probably true. I wonder why that is, and I wonder if it has anything to do with having made a career out of appealing to hyper-religious people in order to convince them of wild conspiracy theories.
They didn't have computers. They didn't have a general understanding that we have today of the process.
Do you think we understand more now?
Yes.
Really?
How is that a really statement? We know more about science now than we did in the 19th century, or indeed ever. How is that a contentious thing to say?
You don't think that we understand more today?
We understand way less.
We know less? Hey, Tucker, how many podcasts do you suppose were shared over the internet during the 19th century? Or do you think that maybe the technology which is currently allowing you to broadcast your deliberate refusal to think about words to millions of people is the result of us knowing more things now than we did back then? Like, how does anybody take this guy seriously?
We understand so little that we're actually sitting here allowing, a bunch of greedy, stupid, childless software engineers in Northern California to flirt with the extinction of mankind. So no, previous generations would be like, what? No, stop. And we're not doing that because
but they wouldn't have done that even with the nuclear bomb.
And the segment pretty much ends there with him saying that we're flirting with the end of the world as if that's a new concern, and that is somehow indicative of us not knowing anything about biology. Because remember, that is the actual prompt that he was responding to. He wasn't saying that we know less philosophically or that we're behaving stupidly or anything like that. He said people didn't used to believe in evolution, and Joe said, well, we know more stuff about science now. And Tucker's response was, no, we actually know less stuff. And then he launched into that weird little rant about software engineers where he made sure to mention 2 times that they didn't have any children, because who's having children is really important when you believe in the Great Replacement Theory. Oh, and for the inevitable commenter that is now going to try to accuse me of just calling everything and everyone that I don't like racist, take a look at this clip.
My family watches Tucker Carlson's show once and then watches it on the replay because they feel that he is making the white nationalist talking points better than they have, and they're trying to get some tips on how to advance it.
That was a former white supremacist talking about how he and his family used to watch Tucker Carlson in order to make their racist arguments better. I'm not sorry that you saw that clip. I'm sorry that you had to. What I find most frustrating about people like Tucker, aside from his whole, self, is that he's presenting creationism as if it is on par with or even supersedes real scientific research just by virtue of being an idea. When Tucker or other creationists try to convince people that creationism is a reasonable alternative to evolution, you'll notice that they never actually present any positive evidence for creationism, because that would necessitate that they first prove the existence of a creator. But because they can't do that, they instead just try to poke little holes in evolution or express that they can't come up with a naturalistic explanation for whatever thing in nature, and so they just insert magic as if that's the default position when you can't explain something. If you don't know something, it's okay to just say, I don't know. It doesn't mean that you have to be satisfied with not knowing. It doesn't mean that you can never find out. It just means that you're honest enough to admit where your knowledge is limited. And it's so much better than the creationist approach of saying, I don't know, and therefore I do know, and it's a thing that I neither have nor need evidence for, because me rejecting your claim is the same thing as having evidence for my claim. It's lunacy. And if you're someone who's currently kind of on the fence about creationism versus evolution, and you think that maybe I'm being a little bit harsh here, just try for a second to hold these two arguments up to each other and see how they stack up. You see, in science, you never accept a hypothesis. You only fail to reject it. You are constantly trying to prove yourself wrong, and you only move forward with an idea when you can no longer do that. And so in terms of evolution, we have hundreds of years of rigorous study and notes and observations from countless scientists. We've sequenced and compared genomes, we've measured and tested the fitness advantages of different adaptations, we've calculated the precise biomechanics of different limb structures across hundreds of millions of years. And not only that, we've observed evolution both in the laboratory and out in the field, and developed the central theory of biology, the one idea that is so robust and profoundly explanatory that literally all biological science hinges upon it. And the creationist argument is that a guy did it. It was just some guy. And as I've pointed out several times before in this series, it's never just any guy, it's always their guy. It is their specific God from their specific interpretation of their specific translation of their specific holy book, and he always uses he, him pronouns. All of this bombast about an incomplete fossil record, an irreducible complexity, and random mutations and unguided processes is all just a facade, because at the end of the day, they would argue just as fervently with a creationist from a different faith, because it's not about science, it's about their guy. And as we've seen in so many other episodes of this series, that's why they bring up Darwin so much, because they can't wrap their heads around independent thought, and they think that we worship him the same way that they worship some guy. So here we are as biologists, working our brains to the bone, gathering evidence and analyzing data, and trying to learn just a little bit more about this magnificent creative process that has given us every bit of advancement in agriculture and medicine, even before we even knew what it was doing. And on the other hand, you've got creationists sitting over here with their arms folded going, are you sure about that? Because it could also just be some guy floating around in space, and he's got like magic powers and stuff, and he's whipping up planets and things because he's like a space wizard and he's cool like that. And if I'm honest, I'm hearing everything you're saying, but I'm starting to think it might be the magic space guy. Like, if you take nothing else away from this video, from this series, from this whole channel, I just hope that you remember that these two ideas are not even close to being on equal footing. One of them is actual science backed by actual evidence that is not only well supported but also predictive and tells us things about the natural world and holds all of biological science together. And the other is just a guy. And I've been reading a lot about the guy, and I don't think he has like a plan for the 25,000 people that starve to death every day, but I am 100% sure that he does not want you to be gay, so don't. Overall, I give this very short and yet still somehow way too long clip a Science Teacher Challenge level 1 out of 10. You barely need to understand the basics of evolution to completely dismantle everything that Tucker is saying here. similarly to how you barely need to understand the basics of history, or economics, or logic, or sociology, or basic human decency to dismantle anything else that he ever says. This was a pretty short clip, so there wasn't a whole bunch to say about it, but I hope you enjoyed this video anyway. And if you did, then there's a good chance that you like learning cool things about science, and if that's true, then you should check out the sponsor of today's video, Brilliant. Brilliant is an awesome app that allows you to learn real math and science in fun, interactive, daily lessons right in the palm of your hand. Rather than offering boring lectures or dense reading materials, Brilliant allows you to learn by doing, with thousands of lessons in math, data analysis, programming, physics, and AI. And the best part is, they're offering my subscribers a full 30 days of Brilliant Premium absolutely free, plus an additional 20% off to an annual subscription to Brilliant Premium, and all you gotta do to get it is use the link down in the description, or just go to brilliant.org/Forrest Valkai. Brilliant's interactive lessons are addictingly fun and uniquely effective because they're designed by an award-winning team of teachers and researchers from places like MIT, Duke, and Caltech. And once you start getting into them, you'll quickly realize that you're not just learning science, you're developing problem-solving skills and becoming a better thinker as well. So start building your daily learning habit today by going to brilliant.org/Forrest Valkai, or just click the link in the description. Remember, you get to try it absolutely free for a full 30 days, and you get 20% off your annual subscription when you use my link. And with that, I'm Forrest Valkai. Thank you so much for watching, liking, commenting, subscribing, and all the other stuff they do here on YouTube. Please exit through the gift shop, pick up one of these sweet t-shirts. Have an awesome rest of your day, and never stop learning. Bye-bye.
I love women, but they're extremely primitive. They're basic. They're not that hard to understand. Iraq is a crappy place filled with a bunch of, semi-literate primitive monkeys. But I just have zero sympathy for them or their culture, a culture where people just don't use toilet paper or forks. White men have, they've contributed some, I would say, like creating civilization and stuff. I think they've done a pretty, whatever.
We have a moral obligation to admit the world's poor, they tell us, even if it makes our own country poorer and dirtier and more divided.
There's some really good, immigrants. I just think it's, people who come to this country ought to have something to offer. Be hot, be really smart, you know what I mean?
Western civilization is our birthright. It makes all good things possible. Undefended, it collapses. And so we've got to fight to preserve it.
Nobody cool like Tucker Carlson. Nobody cool like Tucker Carlson. Nobody cool like Tucker Carlson. If you like Tucker Carlson, then you're not cool. Cause nobody cool like Tucker Carlson. Only a fool would like Tucker Carlson. Nobody cool like Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson is the worst. He's a maniac, sociopath, white supremacist, fear-generating mouth with an emphasis on lies and misinformation. With that infuriating look on his face, and a court of law accepted an argument that no reasonable person would take him seriously. And while that's technically true, people do, and that's why I'm like, shut the hell up, Tucker Carlson, please go away. Tucker Carlson, nobody who's even a little bit cool would say they don't think you're a total tool.